Our speaker today is Dr. Don Cowan, Distinguished Professor Emeritus and Director of the University of Waterloo Computer Systems Group. Dr. Cowan will speak to you, and he's changed the title a little bit, he'll tell you why, about a strategy for sharing world environmental data and information. Don grew up in Toronto, came to Waterloo in 1960 to do his graduate work under the well-known mathematician, Dr. Ralph Stanton. I first met him when he helped me learn to program in Fortran. Among his many honors, in 2007, Don received the Brazilian National Order of Scientific Merit Grand Cross from the President of Brazil in recognition of his research and the more than 40 years he had helped with the development of Brazilian computer science. Don and I reconnected in the late 1980s, and a letter dated June 17, 1991 from him to me as IBM Manager of Business Development in Ottawa, requested support from IBM for work he was undertaking to develop an information framework for environmental research and management. I retired the next February to pursue my interests in the environment sustainable development and continued to assist Don's efforts where I could. In December 1992, Dr. Doug Wright, University of Waterloo President, and Dr. Arthur Carty, Dean of Research, and of course, Arthur became the president of the NRC for 10 years. They tabled our partnership proposal to Canadian business, industry, universities, and government. And it was entitled A Strategy for Sharing Environmental and Socioeconomic Data and Information. Support for that proposal came from many sources, including over $1 million in hardware and software from IBM to help develop the envisioned strategy and tools. So that effort that began 30 years ago was the beginning of many successful developments by Dr. Cowan and his University of Waterloo team, including what he will share with you today. I give you Dr. Don Cowan.
Oh, thanks very much. Appreciate it. And greetings from Waterloo, Ontario. It's a great honor to be asked to talk to your group and to follow such a distinguished set of speakers. I watched several of them and they're quite interesting. I changed the title of the talk a little bit because strategy sounds like I have a plan, and I have to confess I don't have a plan. What I have is a direction, so I changed the word strategy to approach. First of all, I should explain that I am a geek. That is, I'm an engineer, computer science, mathematician, computer scientist, and entrepreneur. Based on my education, training, and career. But I'm very interested in using information technology to help solve some of society's problems. As we all know, some days it causes more problems than it solves, but that's not my goal. So I watched Derek Paul and Bill Reese's talks, and frankly, it scared the hell out of me. And I wondered about talking about this material. It doesn't solve the problems they bring up, but it hopefully pushes us in the right direction. I think Bill said that the ideal population for planet Earth is about 2 billion people. Well, I'm not planning on that one, but that's the general direction I want to go. So, now I can't make my, as a group, we are having huge environmental impact. I mean, the standard pictures you see of melting ice in Antarctic or Greenland, or the fact that the Arctic Ocean is thawing sooner and not freezing as quickly and what have you. And we get all sorts of credible information from various groups, federal government, UN, credible news organizations, and everything. And I look at it and I feel terrible. But then the grass is green and my flower beds are going fine. The lilacs are in bloom. So the impact doesn't strike me. Obviously, we should be concerned. And I know that this group is very concerned about the environment. But what about the general population, and how do we communicate that concern to the general population? I guess, first of all, my observation is we're local. We are most affected by what happens to our house, our property, and our neighborhood. That is, the further we go from home, the less impact we feel, whether we're traveling or whether we're just thinking about things. So, but at the same time, our impact, our local impact, can have huge effects on the global environment. So we need a lot more local knowledge. We need people who are locally focused to understand the implications of what's doing. And yes, we are working at that, but can we work a lot faster? You know, we all feel very comfortable about where we live. Yeah, we really know very little. It's surprising how little we know. Everything we learn about our local environment is by observation. It's sure not by measurement. So there's a huge need for local data and knowledge to help us understand where we are and where we're going. So there's a question of needing to acquire local data and knowledge. And there's lots of local data out there that local governments created, local NGOs created. We have citizens creating it. We have scientists creating it. We have citizen scientists creating it. We have businesses creating it. All sorts of local data that's telling us about where we are, where we live. But frankly, most of it's unusable. If you think about it, you know, we talk these days about open data, but most of that data really is unusable. I don't know if any of you have tried to take the open data called the zoning bylaws in your community and looked at them. They're almost unreadable. I've worked with them for about 20 years now, and I still have trouble with them. And a lot of the data that we gather in a community is actually just sits in various places. Somebody goes out and makes a report on some particular facet of the community. The information is gathered, the summary of it sits in a report or on a computer, what have you, never gets used again. Somebody retires, the information disappears, or they get reassigned to another job, whatever. The big problem is we have all this local data, we don't recycle it, we don't invest in keeping it. And when somebody goes to make a report, typically 60% of what they do is gathering the data just to make the report. And that just keeps happening over and over again. So actually what we need, and I've called it a local data grocery store, where we actually go to we can go to it'd be online obviously, but we can go to that store and we can pick from the various things, or if it's not available, we can find out where it might be. And I call it one-start shopping as opposed to one-stop shopping, because you're not going to stop at that store, you're going to go beyond it. And then of course, once we've got that data, can we combine that data to create value? For example, if you take things in a community like 211 calls, can you take those along with where, what can I say, distribution of income and what have you, and determine where the 211 calls are coming from and what is causing those 211 calls, just as an example. I can explain that more if somebody wants to go into it. Now, I've been working at this whole problem of operating on local data for about 30 years in various forms. One is locating it, another one is bringing it together, and then a third one is combining it. How do you combine local data to make sense of it, and then how do you extract value from all those combinations? How do you take data, and data is hard to find, it's hard to bring together, and then combining it is extremely difficult. So I'd like to touch on 3 examples that we've done to just illustrate the kind of thing that we have undertaken to try and show some of our ideas. I should point out before I start that almost all of these data acquisition exercises, if you want to call them that, required us to agree to set up data sharing agreements with the organizations. That is, we couldn't just grab the data, we had to actually negotiate, and that took some time, as you can imagine. So the first one I want to talk about is one which is called mypursehuron.ca, and that is the actual address of it. For many, many years, I've been interested in taking sources of local data and bringing them together I've already had. And every time I tried that approach with people, to be blunt, I get told quietly where to go. But I approached a group in southwestern Ontario, the United Way, actually, of Purse Huron in southwestern Ontario, who were producing a written report on the state of the community. They'd produce it every 3 or 4 years, and asked them if they would be interested in, I'll say, computerizing this or webifying this data. And they were very excited about the idea. So over the last, well, as you can see, 8 years, we have been producing a system, and you see a snapshot of one page of it, which talks about different aspects of the community: education, housing, government, environment. And as I say, you can go to the site and you can wander the site and see what they do. The beautiful part about it is that we built the idea and the technology, but now the community has taken it over. They've actually formed a group that is constantly adding new data to it. And what they've discovered is that that data gives them a real power, because they are the only people who really know and understand their community. And just a simple example, we have environment. The environment is data is focused on primarily consumption and recreation. One of the counties, of course, borders Lake Huron, and so the public health unit does things such as E. coli measurements during the season to see if the weather of water, is suitable for swimming. So they have published this data in the past, but of course it's buried in a public health site. People in general don't go looking in public health sites. We've managed to make it far more public, and the cottagers, for example, are very excited and quite interested in this kind of material. I should add that the work to do this was funded by the Ontario Poverty Reduction Fund and the United Way. A second one that we have been working on, and this one is since 2008, 13 years. And the map that you see there is obviously a map of Ontario, and it shows all the sites that we have measured. Basically, we are measuring, not me personally, but this is all the data collected on biological and geomorphology of flowing waters in Ontario. Now, by flowing waters, I mean rivers and streams. And it comes from multiple sources. It's 50 to 100 years of data. There are 60,000 sites on that map. Obviously, that's why it's so solid blue, in which information is gathered. And there are 300,000 fish catches. And the person who is in charge of this data reminded me to say that most of the fish are put back. That is, they are handled very gently and put back into the water. The data is over 100 years old, and the first data point was dated 1882. And that data has come from multiple sources and partners: the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, the Royal Ontario Museum, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and most Ontario conservation authorities, including the one in your area, Rideau Valley. And quite a large number of Canadian universities are participating, not so much by supplying data, but by using the data to support their research. And it's constantly expanding the sources and the data types that we will gather. It's focused right now on biology. There's also a whole area of chemistry, that is what is the water like from other points of view, and that is gradually being added to as well. The data is collected, most of the data is collected using a thing called the Ontario Stream Assessment Protocol, which in effect tells you what data you should be collecting. And it's very good in that if we find a data point that's, say, in Southeast Asia or something, we immediately look for errors in the data. And it's well units, as a colleague of mine put it. If we find a stream that has a bigger water flow than Niagara Falls, we tend to think that might be an error in the data. The data itself is used in all sorts of ways to talk about the stability of a stream or river. Temperature tells you about what kind of things are likely to be found in that river. And of course, if you look at temperature over time, that the river itself may be changing. That is, you may be going from brook trout, which are cold water fish, to some warm fish, warmer water. And then, of course, there's all the stuff in the bottom of the stream, which we commonly call benthic goo, which is all little various invertebrates and what have you. And that it can tell you a lot about the health of the thing as well. The people can access this data, but there are rules in place for it, such as you cannot, what can I say? Some of the groups that supply the data limit who can see it, and we also want to know who is looking at the data and who's using it, because sometimes errors are located after the fact, and we have to tell people about them. We want to know who's working on it. Now, this, of course, was funded primarily by Canary, which has put almost $1 million into it, and the Canary being the Canadian Internet Agency, and the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry. Now, a third one, which is we started in about 2004, is Indigenous knowledge. We call it Dreamcatcher. And it's a secure database of Indigenous knowledge. And I say it's secure because the Indigenous folks, First Nations people, are very careful about who they share their information with. There's a lot of work here with respect to land claims and what have you, but the kind of things it does, it describes traditional lands, history, culture, archaeology, lots of ecological knowledge, and it doesn't necessarily use Western science. You might say it uses Indigenous science. It's also a record of Indigenous documents, and for example, you could have a wampum belt in there as a document, and it would be recorded and an interpretation provided. It's highly geographic, and one piece of information is that's in there is the Peter Jones diary. Peter Jones was a Presbyterian minister who was First Nations and was very interested in cataloging all the information about the First Nations in Ontario and offering some opinions on how they should proceed. This was primarily done with the Mississaugas of the New Credit, whose primary location is in Hagersville, Ontario. It's also collected information from some of the Northern Ontario First Nations. And it, of course, again, was funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and the Mississaugas of New Credit themselves. So that gives you some idea of the kind of data we can collect. But frankly, if data, as the title says, is necessary but boring, that is, you have a lot of numbers out there, but who remembers numbers very well? You remember your license plate, maybe. You might remember your height and weight, but not much else. So, but data is absolutely necessary. We need it to understand what we're talking about. And if you think data is, if you disagree with me on that, just about data being necessary but boring, just watch the COVID press conferences. They put me to sleep most of the time, and I'm a mathematician. But data tells us where we've been, in other words, what's happened in the past. What are the trends? That is, are things getting better or worse in some sense? So however we would define better or worse, for example, is that flowing water that goes past my house, is it becoming warmer over time or colder or what? And of course, what is the likely future going to be based on what we already know? And of course, we use mathematical models to determine what that future is likely to be. So how do we bring data to life? That's the real question. And I want to bring it to life, and I want to use stories to talk about data. Some people call that advertising. And specifically, I'm very interested in history, culture, and environmental stories. There's lots of other stories that are important. So how can we characterize the environment based on stories as opposed to measurements, if you will? And of course, we have lots of precedent for this. The First Nations themselves use stories all the time they don't write down a bunch of numbers and pass on the numbers to somebody. They pass on a story that characterizes what things were like in the past. So we, in our work with data, have also characterized it by stories. I had to be at a meeting one time, and fellow stood up and said, every number has to have a story associated with it. And so in my Purse Huron, the one that I just described, we actually have a whole page of stories that describe things like minimum wage, for example, environmental impacts. What are we doing about why is Lake Huron the way it is right now? So that's one area where we've worked. The other area where we've worked is, I'll call them portable stories, because many stories are place-based. You, in some sense, have to go there. And so we've created storytelling tools. One storytelling tool is building stories, and this was developed, about 8 years ago now. And it's stories about historic buildings in Canada, old buildings. It contains about 3,200 buildings, so obviously it's just scratching the surface. But the building stories tools has information about the buildings, a little bit of their history, any interesting things they might have been. This is a haunted building or whatever, and also information about their architectural features. Another one we created a few years ago is First Story, and this was done again with the First Nations folks. Basically, the Mississaugas of the New Credit used to be around the edge of Lake Ontario, around Toronto, before they were displaced, and they brought together all the First Nations groups in Toronto, and we built a set of stories about Toronto. Now, these all operate on portable devices like cell phones, smartphones. We sort of recognized this, that storytelling was a good idea, and these tended to have a real focus, a specific focus. So we have since built a new thing called Driftscape, and Driftscape tells much broader stories. It tells cultural stories, historical stories, environmental stories, and other things that we might come up with. And so Driftscape currently actually incorporates First Story in it, among other things, and will hopefully in the near future incorporate building stories. So Driftscape is the ability to tell stories. I call it stories in your pocket. It's a mobile, based on your mobile phone, and what you're seeing on the screen right now is a section of Toronto. The reason we use mobile phones, virtually everyone has one these days, except for my host, Paul Koch. And Driftscape is designed to tell local stories. So you basically bring up a screen such as you see there, and these little icons on the screen, each one represents a story. And so you can poke at that icon and will tell it, and up will come a story. So if you look in the middle of that screen, you can't read it, I'm sure, but it basically is the story of Pablum. And it comes out of a collection called 50 Stories That Define Toronto. So it's culture, it's history, it's environment. And of course, you can do this on the move. The stories don't have to be, you can be walking through an area on foot. You can be biking. You can be in a canoe paddling down a river. Just make sure your phone is secure before you do that. Or you can be in a car. And you can see the stories around you. And if there is a story near you, you will be notified. So it tells you about the story. You can also tour places on the couch, which is kind of convenient these days with COVID-19. So you can actually move around the countryside. And there are many, many stories. There are, at last count, about 50 different organizations that are telling their stories in various ways. Many, many cities have adopted the technology. City of Toronto, Brockville, near you folks, Lethbridge, Alberta, for example, just to give you a couple of examples. And the stories can be single stories or they can be tours. So I'll come and I'll show you a little bit of a tour in a moment here. And the tours can be text and multimedia, graphics, audio, video. So you can have a story coming at you where people are describing things verbally or showing you things. It tends to be focused on community stories more than anything else at the moment, partly because community stories are the easiest to acquire. That information already exists. Environmental stories are a little harder because you have to create the story to convey a message. The other beautiful part about it is the content is easily added or changed by the supplier of the story. So you don't need a lot of techies between you and Driftscape. Normally, I'd run a demonstration. The demonstration will be available on the recorded YouTube version of this. I will just skip and show you a few things. These are brief tours. Left-hand picture just shows you a view of Canada and a good part of the sites. There's about 5,000 sites in it right now. The next one just shows you can either look at things by location or you can look at a list of things, and the list is governed by the where you are on the map. So it gives you the list in order, in that the closer things are, the higher they are up on the list. And then there's one example here, the Puxawa National Park in Northern Ontario. And this couple of pictures, the first one shows you the expanded site. It tells you about the location of the site, its history, human history, et cetera, facilities. And then the second slide is meant to show you that we can do tours as well. So there's actually a tour along the Toronto waterfront, which indicates the Indigenous population, primarily in Mississauga is a new credit. And as you walk along, you are told at various locations what a specific location is relevant to. So the idea is to tell stories, and because people remember stories, and we would like to push harder on environmental stories, local stories about appreciating the environment. Isn't it beautiful? Or protecting the environment, or rehabilitating the environment, changing it over time. We'd like to engage the community very much in making the environment a high priority. So, and of course, we can focus on local natural sites, wildlife, trails and tours, things like the Bruce Peninsula or the National Trail System, or community-based sites. For instance, we have a site called Rare here in Waterloo region. The other thing is, of course, as you know, cell phones don't work everywhere. So before you go, you don't want to suddenly discover the signal has disappeared when you're in the middle of visiting a site. So you can actually capture the sites on your phone before you go. And so you don't need to be connected to the cell network. So that gives you the idea of what we're up to in terms of gathering data, which is very important, and then adding stories to that data. What we want to do next is create more in-depth local stories for a lot of people. We want to engage storytellers. I mean, some of you may have been in various forms of communication. Could we enlist your skills to tell stories about what's going on? Excuse me for 1 second, but I've got to take a drink here. We want to be able to create a data grocery store. I call it a data grocery store, which means we can combine ingredients like data and language. For instance, can we take numbers, but can we take documents, and can we extract meaning from documents to create new dishes? In other words, can you go into the vegetable department, buy some tomatoes and lettuce, radishes, cucumbers, and make a salad? And we are planning on using artificial intelligence methods to do all those various kinds of things. The current artificial intelligence is very good at detecting patterns and relationships. And then the idea is, of course, to extract value from that data. Whoops. Sorry. And that's basically my talk. Thank you so much for being kind enough to listen to me. And if any of you are interested in the information, there's the information about how to find the various sites. Driftscape itself, you can just go to the stores, the App Store or the Play Store, and download it directly. It doesn't cost anything. A Purse Huron, it's totally open. The Flowing Waters Information System. Excuse me, you have to register just because we are worried that people will use the data and not, excuse me, and not realize there's been changes. And then, of course, the Dreamcatcher one is secure because of the nature of the information, although they will share, the First Nations will share it with people as appropriate.
Well, thank you, Don, for a very insightful and far-reaching presentation of your work. And I think it was very well done and clear to people. We have only a question from Ray, which I'll let him ask. And then I think Art has a question, and then I have one, and there may be some others in the meantime.
Yeah. Excuse me for go ahead.
So Ray, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I have about hundreds of hours of flux measurements. Like we measure across North America, we measure 100 variables 30 times per second, and I've written a paper to try to publicize this data, but I've not had much feedback. It could be used for doing all kinds of things, developing environmental response function to increase the value of satellite data, that kind of stuff. But as I was listening to Don's talk, I thought maybe writing stories about the data might be one way to go about. I was just wondering if you have some suggestion. Like it's a large amount of data. Like I said, we collect 100 variable 30 times a second, and we've done that for 25 years.
Oh my God!
So not continuously though. We've gone all over North America. We did field campaign with the Flight Research Lab of the National Research Council. So, and I've had a lot of postdoc. We've written many publications on it. But I'm just retired about a year ago, and I sort of find that it's a crime not to publicize that more. Like for example, we studied an eclipse in California, and we measured with the aircraft during the eclipse, that kind of stuff. We studied all the major ecosystem in North America, and just sort of was wondering if you had some suggestion how to publicize that data. It's very well documented in all kinds of every campaign we did. We wrote a big story documenting all the data, but just wanted to know what you thought would be a good way to publicize that.
You're asking a really hard question, and I guess the thing is, I'm not questioning the value of the data, by the way, when I say what I'm about to say, but the big problem is to convince other people of the value of the data, because one of the problems we're doing is we're all collecting data, and then we're basically throwing it away.
Yeah. So much.
and we need to find a better way to. Excuse me, I've seen we've got a frog in my throat. But we need to find, in general, better ways to do this, and we need more and more people to come together and start pushing on various government agencies. Like there's all sorts of movements to quote make data more available. Except, frankly, I think I'll be blunt. I'll say that I find them feeble. Because they says use these what they call a DOI, publish your data under a DOI. Yeah, fine. who the hell's going to keep it? Where's it going to go? How's it going to be preserved? Who's going to look after it? There's a whole bunch of issues there. It's still stuck back on the original person to do that, even though they've spent 30 or 40 years of their life gathering it all.
Does it make sense to hook the two of you up through your mutual emails to talk about this further?
Yeah, there's another fellow we work with, excuse me, he was a fisheries biologist with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry in Ontario. And he is basically, I would say, one of the two driving forces behind the Flowing Waters Information System database. So he might be a good guy to bring into the conversation. I don't exactly know where the conversation would go, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Art has a question, and then followed by John Meyer, and then I'll have one as it stands now.
Okay, Don, I listened to this and just thought of all the stories I've heard from our sister organization, CMOS, the Canadian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society.
Right.
They just have a ton of them. Have you been working at all, or do you know if the Dreamscape people have been working with them? Because boy,
no,
they have a ton of stories.
Yeah. No, we haven't. I mean, Driftscape started out in my lab as an idea, and we built a version of it, and it is now a company. And what we did is we reached out to organizations which we knew had stories, and the obvious ones are communities, because we've got historical artifacts of various kinds. They've got statues, all sorts of things that you can imagine that they would tourist sites that they would tell their stories about. And we reached out to people like Historica, which have a ton of stuff as well. We haven't reached out to people who have, I'll say, other kinds of stories, just because of limited resources, so to speak. I'd say more than anything else. But again, we should be getting this stuff out there somehow.
Yeah, I can see what I would call an embarrassment of riches. I mean, if you've got a tool like this, I mean, you can have a very large database. You're soon into the realm of big data and
Oh, yeah.
and doing AI and finding ways around. I mean, it can get very complex.
Oh, yeah.
I guess an associated one is, I didn't quite understand when you were talking about it, but you can get an app which I can put on my smartphone and I can walk around. But what about when I'm driving in my Tesla 3 and I put the internet up? Can I access a URL and somehow it is also looking at my GPS position and telling me stories which are local to me wherever I am?
Okay, now what I'm about to tell you may not be solely accurate because I'm not completely up to date, but there is, you can have your cell phone with you, and as you move around. So if you're in the car, you have your cell phone with you, it moves around with you, so to speak. There is also a web version of the system, but I don't believe it's geographically sensitive. That is, I haven't tried it yet myself because it just came out about 2 weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to try it. So, so there's two parts. There's the mobile part, and there's the sitting at the desktop part, if you will. So if you're in your car,
but my point is, my desktop is my car, and where my car goes, the desktop goes. And therefore, maybe what I'll try and do, if you can give me the desktop URL, I'll try it out and see what it does.
Okay, I will making a note to myself to say I haven't had a chance to try it yet myself, but
okay, thank
There
you.
you go. John Meyer next.
Okay. Thanks, Don. My point of interest, you seem to be gathering data to be able to present it to individuals for their interest. And my interest would be developing models to use for the formation of national policy. We don't have coherent national policies, I don't think, in terms of environment and the economy. And I see a lot of people gathering a huge amount of data, but they don't have any place to put it. And do you see a possibility of creation of a standard kind of model, in a biophysical model, where people can plug their data in, and this model would the structure would be basically universal. So you could use it for countries, you could use it for communities, whatever, but it would have the same structure, and you could put the data in. And then that would affect the outcomes if you wanted to run trends or forecasts. To me, there's just no place to put the data. Charlie Hall was mentioning this in the US. He mentioned some very large government database, which is essentially now not being maintained any longer. And I see that, it's all part of the same problem. We don't know what to do with the data. We don't know where to put it. If we had models, we'd have places to put it, and we'd have means of comparing the data, which I think is a huge problem. Anyway.
Okay. Standards for data, storing data are well, they're just about impossible at this moment in time. I'm not saying what we are doing in one of our things, and not environment area, but is we are looking at, I'll call it something like the Purse Huron thing, except it's broader. We are looking at data and saying, okay, you've got some data, it follows this standard. That's okay. We'll suck it up, take it apart, and extract value from it. And we've actually done quite a bit of work on that. We've got a long way to go, but that's the idea. Rather than, in other words, if you've collected a whole bunch of data, you want it you store it a certain way. That's fine. We'll as long as we can get at it, and you can tell us what it looks like, we'll figure out what to do with it. I don't see us ending up with, I'll call it, big data repositories that we can store stuff in. I see us distributed all across the in my case, I'm looking at municipal governments, all across municipal governments. They all use different ways of doing things. There's one group looking at, and I use zoning bylaws because I'm quite familiar with it, zoning bylaws and making it a highly structured database. In another case, I know of one city where you go in and ask the zoning bylaws and they say, okay, they're stacked over there, and they literally have to go through tons of paper. And there's one database that you may be familiar with. It's called Terranet. And Terranet is basically, for Ontario, it's the database of all properties in Ontario. And that took about 20 years to actually pull together. I know because I know one of the principals behind it. And so I'm not really answering your question because we just aren't there yet.
Well,
we haven't got people thinking in the right way yet, and I'm not even sure what the right way is. We're learning a lot as we go.
Right. Well, that's I think a huge problem. But you're highlighting the problem, and just shows how far we are from sort of establishing the Svalbard of data. So anyway, okay. No, that's fine. Thanks.
That's the last question at the moment, except for mine. And I think one of the reasons that I suggested to Art that we have Don speak is because within KCOR, we have an incredible database of brain power from federal government and other locations and the history of Canada. And all these folks are still interested in helping out here and there. In Ottawa, we have quite a few community groups that are working on environmental things, which is why I thought if we invited them to today, and I did invite 11 different people from 7 different groups, and some of them are online, I know, and others said I can't be available at that time, but if you'll send me the URL later, we'll look at it. But if we could hook some of these people up with things like Driftscape and some of the projects these groups are working on, there may be some of the K-Corps members that say, hey, that's something I'd be interested in helping these community groups or this community group. So I'm hopeful that something may come out of it. So Don, what's the question to you is what's the best way for us to keep the lines of communication open on this?
Okay. Well, yeah, I saw somebody put up a little chat thing, which I'd like to respond to, and then I'll answer your question.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that one for some reason.
Well, no, I don't know whether it was somebody has already downloaded Driftscape. Thank you. Okay, there's 2 parts of Driftscape, or 2 kinds of
Oh yeah, I see a new question.
groups. One are users and the other are customers. The users are the people who can access anything that's on the system. The customers are the people who supply the information. So for example, Brockville, Ontario, I use it as, I'm pretty sure, yes, it was Brockville, would buy a license to Driftscape and would put its data in. You know, in other words, it does cost money to run this thing. But anybody who goes to Brockville or finds Brockville on the map can then look at any of that information. So you can't just put in something arbitrarily. Okay, you have to in effect, I'll say, buy a license to put stuff in. So
Okay, now I see there are 4 questions that weren't there before. So
right.
back to the first one's from Dave Doherty.
Yep.
And then the next one is from Ted Manning.
Sure.
Dave?
Yeah, just give me a moment. I'm going back to where I typed that.
Oh, do you want me to read it?
No, because I didn't type it the way I want to ask it. Okay, so a lot of my recent experience was with health information, although I have been looking at various other aspects of environmental information. I've just tried to start inserting some sites on the K-Corps website that will automatically update things like the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and give us a place to go and look at certain key information.
Sure.
That we don't have to update ourselves. It's other people who are doing it. And I was able to do that with health information at a variety of scales. So my question is regard to the feasibility of doing things with such systems at provincial, national, continental, and global scales. I think it is being done with health data already. I'm not certain the extent to which it's being done with environmental data, but I know I've been extensively using myself Our World in Data, and I think maybe Worldometers and a few other such sites. Mm-hmm. There's an OECD website on health information, for example, which is really good. So do you think that there's good feasibility to do this at these various scales? And to what extent do you think it's already being done?
As far as I can tell, and you know, I mean, I don't know everything by a long shot. So if you're talking about information at a, I'll say a national level or a provincial level in Canada, for example, it's pretty good. You know, I mean, StatsCan will come out and say that the GDP or whatever is blah, 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 whatever the number is. The thing is, in my community, they just closed down a major manufacturing facility and the GDP in my town is not very good at all. So it's a matter of resolution. You know, if you want to know about situations across the world and compare countries, yeah. But if you want to compare small towns to small towns, forget it. If you live in rural Ontario, relatively speaking, and you want to know you want information, it's just not available. So it's a resolution issue more than anything else. There's lots of good information out there. It's just at a very large scale, not a small scale. And
So,
as individuals, we're small scale people. We are local. We're very local. So
yeah.
that's my argument.
So one has to be authorized to access such databases. At one point in time, you can get very granular with health information in Canada, and probably certain other types of information if you had access to certain parts of the StatsCan database that are not generally public. So if you had a reason for accessing it, you might be able to get some kind of a deal with providers of such databases.
Yeah, that's right. If you give them your firstborn child, so to speak, they'll let you look at the StatsCan database.
Okay.
But even there, it's still got a long way to go. I mean, it's not that I'm criticizing it. I'm not. It's very valuable information. It's just when I want to know what's happening on my block, the chances are I can't find out unless I live in a large city, in which case the concentration of information seems to be fairly good. But rural Ontario, by rural, I mean any reasonable sized place, forget it.
Okay, Ted Manning, and then John Lake.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Don. I've been buried in data many times. In fact, they hired me to actually unpile the Canada Land Inventory when they'd spent $56 million collecting information. And then they thought, gee, how are we going to use this? In fact, my first job in Environment Canada was to help them actually do a demand analysis to find out somebody who might actually want to get it and use it. Yep. So I'm now a consultant, and I'm coming at this totally the other end. I'm saying, have you actually talked to the people who you believe would potentially use it? Ask them what they want it for, and then go back and broker the availability of that information, because you can produce an infinite amount of data, and an infinite number of people out there probably won't know about it or even want to use it. So what I'm really, I guess, suggesting is some form of consultative procedures with the people who are believed to be the most likely users, along with workshops to train them how to use it and to access it. In fact, you might even have a commercial client off of it, and possibly even Google.
Yep, I totally agree with you. Okay, we are right now going out and gathering, and the details don't matter, but going out and gathering a lot of municipal data.
Yeah.
And we know what the use cases are. Okay, we think we know. And we have some pretty good expertise on board to convince us of that what we're doing is the right thing. We're also obviously going to go out and survey a few people too to make sure we're not doing something stupid. But
yeah, we never knew before we talked to people either. But the guys squirreling away in the data in the bit mines, in a sense, didn't really care. They were just paid by the byte. So.
Yep. I mean, for instance, in general, the insurance, and I'm talking very general terms now, the insurance industry would be a great customer for certain kinds of data, because their job is risk assessment. And what data can you provide that will help them in their risk assessment? Can you reduce their costs in effect of doing risk assessment? And that's an area where, we're not sure yet how we're going to proceed, but we think we're pretty comfortable with it.
Fair enough. Well, good luck on it. They do need it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, the idea is, can you use machines in effect to extract value from the data and reduce the costs of, in effect, reporting?
So John Lake has an interesting question. Over to John, and then maybe Dave Doherty has another one, although maybe he was just reminding me he was on. He already had one.
Yeah, it was just a reminder.
Okay.
Hey, Don, I would very much like to join your expertise and the expertise that's out there already in the international sphere together. And it's beyond me how one does that, but I'll be more specific. For example, not wanting to invent the wheel, and having been with foreign affairs for 31 years, I have, over the years, learned about what various organizations, and let's say UN agencies, for example, do. Now, I'll right away choose one that's not an agency itself, but is very high on the importance scale, and that is the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change.
Right. Okay. I thought I said the right one. Yep.
Right. Well, as we all know, they have masses of data, and whenever the environmental authorities of each country get together, those experts get together, and so on. And it could be, oh, I don't know, it could be the UN Environment Program. Now, I don't know what various banks of data they have, but we do know that biodiversity statistics of all sorts are collected and kept and so on. And then you go into the various, I don't know, the Food and Agricultural Organization. The amount of polluted earth as it goes up globally. You know, I mean, one can simply let one's mind go as to what really is needed to see and to measure what we, the human species, is in the process of buggering up. That is the whole planet. So I guess what my question is it seems to me that maybe the greater need is for someone, and maybe it's not really needed, but you are so much of an expert in this whole area, if one could almost keep track of the types of data that is out there, and act as a sort of a trading house and as a suggestion authority, that might be something else. But it's, I mean, there's so much that's out there, and the challenge, it seems to me, is how to use it properly. And of course, we all know the main challenge is to get the damned governments who expect that growth will solve all problems. Well, growth is what got us into it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm sorry, I won't get started there. But so there's the question: how do you combine what's out there and what you have as a collection? And is there some way to improve the melding of the two together, and so on? I'm lost there.
Yeah, there seems to be two things going on here. I mean, and I'm being simplistic, I'm sure, but there's the people who are standing up saying the Earth is going to hell in a handbasket. Okay, where temperature is going up, all these things, and here's a picture of the Antarctic, and a big chunk of ice just fell off the Antarctic. It's half the size of PEI, and I accept all that. But again, I look out my window and I don't see anything, so to speak. There's nothing. So there's a resolution issue here, is that as the scientists are saying, we got this data, we've been measuring the temperature of the air in a few places around the world, and we can tell you this is what's going to happen. You know, they have a model, and I don't disagree with any of that. I perfectly legitimate, but we don't have what the hell is the impact on the individual? We have the impact on the population, not the impact, and we are individuals. And even though I like to think we all work together in some sense, we're still individuals, and we experience things as individuals. And I think there's this real problem. And it's been bugging me for years, to be honest with you. I've been, and that's why I sort of tried to produce some examples to show people what the hell can be done, and it's important. You know,
So we have another question. Should I go on, Don, or do you have another comment?
No, it makes me, I feel reassured that you have the same worries.
People
Yeah.
keep adding questions here, so we'll go quickly.
Okay.
And Art, we'll leave it to Art to tell us when we run out of time.
Right.
But Barry Bruce says he's downloaded Driftscape just now, and how does he add a story? Is that something you want to do offline?
Well, that's what I mentioned before. We have people who, I'll say, pay us to add their stories, and
Okay,
people who use the stories, and people who read the stories. That's free.
okay. Bill Pugsley, and then after Bill Pugsley, who was next? Art needs to know this. Bill Pugsley, and then Gene Doherty.
Okay, Paul. Well, thank you, Don. Paul Koch hinted to me your talk was coming, and I already have downloaded your app and used it. But I'm reacting to comments by Art Hunter and John Legge, who expect or are hinting at making use of IPCC and CMOS, which is a knowledge society in Canada, as data distributors. And I'm pointing out that for over 150 years, the Canadian Meteorological Service has the mandate and has been collecting and distributing the data, the observed data it has across Canada. And about 20 years ago, I was the director in charge of the Canadian archives for that, which had 20,000 stations with records going back at least 100 years. Mm-hmm. But the problem with weather data is that they usually are in airports and are usually separated by 20 or 30 kilometers, and so are not, I would think, as community data. And so the gap in all this I see as air quality data. And this comes down to mandates. There is no mandate for the National Met Service to worry about air quality other than air quality research and modeling of that. The mandate is the provinces, and the province of Ontario, for example, runs 40 stations across the whole province. Whereas what is needed, as we see in Europe, is 40 or 50 stations for each city, which is something both Vancouver and Montreal are doing. And now you might be interested, Don, in Ottawa. Ecology Ottawa is a volunteer organization, has a program just starting, which has about 25 portable air quality meters that they are collecting data on. And so I would see if Ecology Ottawa and your organization are interested, making a link between the two to perhaps make use of your Dreamscape app to show what the local air quality is in Ottawa. And I believe the same thing is going on in Toronto as well, and may well be in other cities in the province.
Right.
Rob Barnes.
Have you looked into the air quality or air pollution side on a community basis?
No, we haven't, because what can I say? I know it is a problem when you mentioned it, but I hadn't thought about it, so to speak. But
Rob Barnes of Ecology Ottawa couldn't be here this afternoon because of another commitment, but he's asked me to be sure to send him the link so he can watch it.
That'd be good, Paul.
Yeah,
I think there's an opportunity right there.
yeah, I do too.
Well, I'm thinking I'll call it an environmental version of Driftscape, so to speak. All
right.
You gave it a name, Greenscape.
So we over to Gene?
Yeah. I mean, not trying to be flip, Ecology Ottawa is a volunteer organization, but it does cost money to run all this stuff and make it all work. So we have to recognize that, but figure out how to do that is an interesting issue. Yep. Because I think it's really important that we get community stuff out there.
Yeah.
Well, if you talk to Barnes, there's an equivalent organization in Toronto doing the same thing, collecting volunteer-based collection of air quality data.
Right,
And
yeah.
those two cities, at least, I think could form a potential good aspect on all this on your app.
Well, yeah, and then and not only that, the cities in effect could fund the display of the information as opposed to the collection of the information, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you can give us some connections, and then we can build those connections to whoever one needs to talk to. Yeah, great.
Okay, over to Jean.
Thank you. Interesting presentation. And I don't want to usurp Art, but I have sort of an add-on to the stuff that Art had typed out concerning your data quality and making sure that what you're putting up there or what's going on to your applications are in fact, relatively speaking, quality data and not sort of fake news. I mean, I was personally involved in trying to do what are as similar to what Bill was doing, nationally mandated data sets that have to be maintained. And so you put something up there, you can get something onto a system, but who maintains that data to make sure that it is still accurate or that you are getting the current version and that you're getting appropriate data that's not fake data?
Well, I'll use FWIS as an example. I'm not sure it totally. First of all, if we get information from a municipality, we are assuming the municipality has supplied correct data. You know, it's their legal responsibility, not ours, so to speak. So that would be one. We also automate a lot of the checking. So one of our fish samples turned out to be down off, I think it was Nigeria, around the equator. And we quickly recognized that that did not quite fit into Ontario. So somebody had, in effect, screwed up the map coordinates. Another situation is where people use the wrong measurement system. We're asking for inches and they give us centimeters, say. And so, as a colleague of mine put it, it looks like you have more water going through this stream than flows over Niagara Falls, so to speak. So, there are automated ways to find a lot of this. Now, not all of it. I mean, there can still be mistakes made, and of course, security. Preventing outsiders from putting their foot in is always a problem and always will be a problem, because as fast as we put our finger in the dike, somebody will put another hole in the dike, so to speak. You know, so there's no absolute assurances, but we are very conscious of the problem. We do our damnedest to make sure that it's we are doing our best to make sure that the data is reasonable and comes from reasonable sources. And as far as up to date, we are constantly going back and checking the date. So if you're, again, I'll use zoning bylaws. If the council just updated the zoning bylaw, we would go back and check the zoning bylaw, a new date on it. So we would bring in the latest stuff one way or another.
So how would you deal with, especially if the consideration was going to be environmental data that you're going to put up, that I shall call them climate change deniers, trying to put their stuff on there that will be problematic?
Well, I mean, you know, if we were dealing with I'll say the air quality problem in Ottawa, for example, we would have to have a trusted partner. Okay. So nothing. I'm not claiming anything's perfect here, by the way.
Oh, yeah,
just so you understand.
Yeah.
But that we would have a trusted partner. Let's say the ecology people would put the information into, let's say, the city of Ottawa, who would then make it available as on their site. So, yeah, that kind of thing. You know, the data sharing agreements we had with organizations were partly that, to make sure that we trusted each other, so to speak.
Okay, before I close the meeting, I think Art maybe wants to make a couple of comments, and then I'll thank Don, and we'll.
I just want to extend what Jean has just been saying, because I know a number of people who would be quite happy to pay to put a story, into Driftscape. And I'll tell you, these are some of the people who fund QAnon. They support Donald Trump. They're lobby groups. They're people who have money and political motivations to put up information which, shall I say, is not even half truth, partial truth, and then a whole bunch of exaggeration and distortions, which would probably not stand up under scrutiny from at least from the scientific body of the world. But there would be a lot of folks who within an industry, for example, within the gas and oil industry, who would be quite happy to put forward, or maybe the tobacco industry, to put forward some things that would in fact be stories that supported their advertising. And as I say, lobby groups, there's many of those. And have you ever thought about how you might maintain that quality and avoid getting political?
First of all, at the moment, we're only dealing with, I'll call them reputable organizations, that is either municipalities, or another one is Historica Canada, another one is CanCarta. As far as I'm concerned, they're all reputable. So, yeah, there are issues there. You're absolutely right. I mean, somebody comes along, puts on a whole pile of money and said, I want to put my story on your system. We have to, let's say we have to act responsibly. It's the only thing I can say. I can't guarantee anything, but we would do. We just wouldn't do it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, well, I don't know if that answers your question, Art. It's well, we're always walking that fine line. Various kinds.
I'm just saying it's very difficult, and I know it's an impossible question, but the as far as polarized political systems, just look to the south, and it's happening here in Canada too. What is very true, which is fact to one group of politicians, is just in fact fake news to the other. And how you draw a line, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, well, I was a friend of mine is, well, in fact, 3 or 4 friends of mine are basically the people who founded the internet. And I was on a meeting with one of them not too long ago, and his comment was, "We all started out as a bunch of nice guys wanting to work together." They did not see the law of unintended consequences hit them smack between the eyes, by the time the 90s came around. They just didn't see it coming. And now they basically have to go back and, I'll say, rebuild the internet somehow. How that's going to be done, I have no idea at this point.
There you go. Well, I think that's the end of our day. And one of the objectives I think that I had in connecting Don to KCOR has been achieved, and that's to create a few lines of communication that may be helpful to some KCOR members, may be helpful to the University of Waterloo, and hopefully maybe will be helpful to Driftscape. So I'm quite happy to remain a link if I can be helpful. And we'll thank Don for all I can say is you've come a long way, buddy. Since you taught me Fortran, I couldn't write a line of code now.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I could either.
But there it is. Long journey.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I've enjoyed the conversations. Give me a lot of things for thought, and either connect through Paul or my emails on the last slide that was up there. You can get to me directly. I love to talk to people, and there may be some opportunities that come up.